Hello! Welcome to Money Talks, the bit of Slate Money where we find the most fabulous, interesting, and brilliant people in the world, and we drag them onto this podcast to talk about incredibly fascinating things. I'm Felix Salmon of Axios. I am joined by Emily Peck of Axios because we need two of us for this one.
Hello, hello.
Because, Emily, who do we have on this week?
We have the most wonderful, most brilliant writer in the world, Taffy Brodesser-Akner, has joined us today. Hello.
Hello. Excited to be here.
For those 8 people who might not know exactly who you are, can you introduce yourself and, of course, plug your book?
Sure. I'm Taffy Brodesser-Akner. I'm a staff writer at the New York Times Magazine and the author of, most recently and most urgently, Long Island Compromise, available now from Random House Books. And just in case anyone wants to know what we're talking about, there are these 3 children of wealth that came from a post-war styrofoam factory. They live on Long Island. Their father was kidnapped in 1980, and we meet them after we hear about the kidnapping. Most of the book takes place at this moment after their grandmother, who controlled the fortune, dies, and they make a terrible decision with the output, the excess financial output of the factory, and end up paying the price for it. And they are no longer getting quarterly drops of vast sums. And they suddenly realize, we might have to work for this.
And we are going to delve into what happens in this novel. And we are going to talk a lot about the intersection of class and money. It is a fantastic, really rich conversation in all senses of the word. So I can't wait. It's all coming up on Money Talks.
Hey there, Slate Money listeners. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. AI comes at you fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Whether you're looking to automate tasks or embed AI in your business processes, SAP can help. To learn more, head to sap.com/AI. And stick around for expert advice on how to embrace AI with confidence.
The IKEA Business Network is now open for small businesses and entrepreneurs. Join for free today to get access to interior design services to help you make the most of your workspace, employee well-being benefits to help you and your people grow, and amazing discounts on travel, insurance, and IKEA purchases, deliveries, and more. Take your small business to the next level when you sign up for the IKEA Business Network for free today by searching IKEA Business Network.
Okay, so Taffy, welcome back to Slate Money. It is so awesome, as ever, to have you. I have literally lost count of how many times we've had you on this show. So I want to say that this is the first time we've had you on the show since you have become a bona fide celebrity in your own right. You have made it. You are a major player in Hollywood and the media. And I just want to start off by asking you how that feels.
First of all, what a funny thing to say. Second of all, I guess what is surprising to me is the amount of ways that I find out about those things in moments like this, because I guess in the end, you just feel like whoever you are, right? Because I'm still the same. The last time I was here, I had written a novel. I had made a television show. I was a staff writer at the New York Times Magazine. I'm still all those things. I guess I just feel the same.
Let me rephrase this question in the context of Long Island Compromise, which is a book about many things, but one of the things it's about is envy. And we don't learn very much about the narrator of this book, but we do know that the narrator is coming broadly from a point of envy of this rich family, the Fletchers, and is struggling with this kind of tension of, like, on the one hand, they're very rich and I envy that, but on the other hand, they're all completely fucked up and I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. And there's a natural tendency that most people have to look at people who are richer and more successful and say, like, I covet that, I envy that. Is Do you feel like your earlier self, your, pre-New York Times self, how would you feel about your present day self?
It's interesting you ask that, because I think about that now all the time because I'm asked these questions. I wrote a book about money. I had started writing it when I had so little that I had taken time to start writing it when I was on a trip to do a story that I was doing because we were in very desperate financial straits. And I needed to take this story in Russia, where I was for 12 days, to the sort of trauma of my children. I would say that I try very hard not to think of myself in that way. But I do think that if you had told me back then when I was in Russia starting this book, that one day I'm on staff somewhere and one day I have a second novel out, I have a television show that is now historical, like it is done, it is finished. It is something I pass by on my Hulu app and say, look at that. It's a television show that I helped make. I guess I'm still who I am. And I think it's dangerous for a writer to start being too self-conscious about who she is. But I think probably that version of myself would think that all my problems must be gone. And I can tell you that they're not.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing the book really makes clear, is that people with money still have problems.
People with money still have problems. But also these questions affected the writing of it, because I felt like I could no longer purely write from a person's point of view who was struggling so much financially that there appeared to be no hope. And that sort of paralyzed the process for a while, until I saw the thing that, I don't know if you remember, but when I was, maybe, I don't know if it was the last time I was here or the time before, but we were watching movies about money, and we watched Sense and Sensibility, and we watched Made in Manhattan, to, I remember, your great chagrin.
I will never forgive you for that, Ted.
You will not. I know it's taken this long for you to forgive me and welcome me back. So it's a
great episode.
I appreciate that. But I do think that what I discovered was that the economy had changed so much, in that, like, my drive to try to make some money, I had discounted what other people were very fluent in, the disappearance of the middle class, to learn that once you finally got some money, it didn't matter how much money you had, because it's only ever mattered how much everyone else has, right? Like the people who have inherited wealth, the people who are hoarding property and who are setting the acceptable prices for everything from an apartment to a t-shirt. I had never stopped to realize that there isn't an amount of money that you could come by honestly, right, that would be enough to compete with those market forces. I was so blinded by what it was like to try to make my nut every month that I did not realize that even if you had some surplus, you're staring down into a hole that has no end.
Although you have written a book about a family who are at the end of that hole, as it were. Like, they can and do buy whatever they want without worrying about how much it costs.
Right. And then once they lose their money, they have no idea how to be. And they also have no idea, they don't even have the muscles that you need to be afraid. Like my most defined muscles are the ones that are afraid for my survival. And the inverse of the thing I said, which is, I don't think there's an amount of money. Once you've had a sustained foundational period where you are afraid for your survival, I don't think there's an amount of money. I haven't tested this out yet because I haven't had, the grandest of amounts of money, but I don't think there's anything that will stop you from waking up in the middle of the night and worrying that the bottom could fall out. And the inverse of that is that I think that if you are not foundationally traumatized by questions of your survival, you never really feel that fear.
I think that's the magical power of people who are born into wealthy families is the lack of anxiety around money. And it enables them to make so much more money because they're not making like decisions based in fear of, not having any money. They just don't have that bone or muscle or whatever. Like everyone in your book, I guess, or everyone in the Fletcher family, maybe except for Ruth, who has the muscle. And like when she finds she doesn't have any money is like frantically trying to figure out how to get the money.
And also Ruth, who's the matriarch of that family, who came from a poor family and who sort of has contempt for her children for the way things have been easier for them, even as she made the devil's bargain to marry somebody wealthy so that her imagined children would never suffer the way she did. She comes to find that she has children she cannot relate to.
Yeah, I think the big difference is not even the having or the not having money. It's being born with the money or not born with the money. And that sort of guides how you act. And the folks born with the money, they're not. Ruth is the matriarch, and her 3 children who you write about in the book, the 3 children aren't, like you said, they don't even worry about losing the money, but maybe that's their superpower.
So the thing that handicaps them and makes it so they can't do the things that, let's say, I have had to do in order to ensure my survival, which have also led to my success, right? I take a lot of risks in my writing. I'm vulnerable. I'm honest because I think those are the things that will make me successful. And I think that if I did not have to worry about money, I would be more risk averse.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Let's meet our expert.
Hi, I'm Ian Khan. I'm a technology futurist, speaker, and author, and I love to help organizations measure their current state of readiness for an AI-driven world. I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, our finance team is top-notch, but small. How can AI support them? Signed, Financially Drained.
Well, financially drained, a lot is happening in finance and AI, and the possibilities are endless. First of all, AI can help your finance team analyze massive amounts of financial data faster than any human or a team of people could do. Second, it can help perform functions on data through algorithms. This can connect different systems together and really simplify decision-making for your finance team. And last but not least, AI can help reduce the time needed for data to provide insights so that your leaders can make faster decisions.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
What you're saying aligns very much with the idea that you often find in sort of old school bankers, that they want to hire people who grew up with nothing because those people have the drive and they are always trying to run away from the impecunious standards of their youth, and they will never lose that no matter how much money they make, and that is going to drive the profits. And it's certainly a broadly accepted stereotype, but at the same time, I'm not sure it's true. We had a wonderful episode of this show with Daniel Markovits, who's the Yale law professor who wrote a book about the meritocracy. And he is pretty good at demonstrating how it's the children of the upper middle classes who have the privilege to be able to sort of work hard and become incredibly successful. And if you do grow up in that kind of relatively sheltered world, not all of the people, but a disproportionately large amount of the people who turn out having excessive amounts of success in this world. The example that this all comes from is the graduation speech that Daniel Markovits, who's a professor at Yale Law School, gave to Yale Law School. And Yale Law School is an amazing institution. It's where, the sort of great sort of intellectual capitalists of America all seem to have gone to Yale Law School. It's this tiny law school which punches way above its weight and which doesn't really concentrate on law so much as just sort of like grand ideas and thinking. And if you look at the class of people who've made it into Yale Law School, it is, the children of the tiger moms. It's the upper middle. It's people who were brought up in comfortable circumstances. You know who I'll give you a really good example of, which is someone you know a lot about. Rupert Murdoch is a great example, right? He grew up as the child of a very successful media entrepreneur in Australia. And then his dad died and he inherited this large and valuable company and he turned it into something orders of magnitude larger and more valuable.
I think Mark Zuckerberg's also a really good example, upper middle class, from New Jersey suburbs. Bill Gates, upper middle class.
So other than Zuckerberg, I'll say that I think you might accidentally be proving my point, because the thing I'm talking about is a phenomenon of this moment, right? Ultimately, I'm a magazine writer and I try to write about this moment. I think that what the book uncovers is that in the moment is that this worked up until our generation. There's this concept in the book that often repeated. The first generation builds the house, the second generation lives in the house, and the third generation burns it down. And what I would say is that the burning of it down the living in it has to do with the people who built it. If you are the child of someone like a tiger mom, like a Rupert Murdoch, it depends on the time you existed in, because what you saw that kind of striving. It's the people who were born into the comfort of inherited wealth. Wealth, I don't want to give any spoilers, but it feels like we're on a money podcast. It took me 10 years to write this book, or 9 years. In the last 3 years, as anyone who knows me knows, I'm a pretty quick writer. And though this was more ambitious than anything I'd written before, it's multi-generation, it's multi-point of view. What it also is it's this moment where I kept trying to figure out through reporting, what I wanted was, how do these people lose their money and get it back? That was my question. And the thing, I had to speak to finance people. I had to speak to business reporters, trying to figure it out. And I finally started speaking to people with inherited wealth. And I asked them, how is it possible for you to lose your money? And I came to accept that the answer was going to be pretty banal, because most finance is pretty banal. Most of it is not an action movie. And then I came upon this information that it is nearly impossible, if you are in the sort of third generation of inherited wealth, it is nearly impossible to lose your money.
And that was like one of the things that was really running through my head as I was reading the book. One, I was like invested in the book and I was enjoying the book and it's a great book and everyone should go out and buy it. But then I was also thinking about, like, on a structural level, how you were structuring the circumstances in the book. And one of the things that became very clear quite early on in the book was the way in which you were writing about three of these like third generation rich kids who weirdly didn't really have inherited wealth. They had inherited income. They got massive amounts of income every quarter, but they didn't have that whole infrastructure of private bankers and family offices and people like looking after their money and investing it and all of this kind of stuff that basically all rich people have.
Well, Felix, we run into this every time. All Gentiles have that. Jews, especially post-Holocaust Jews who have any kind of memory of what happened to their money in Germany, are more suspicious of that sort of infrastructure. And what we learn is that while they have a scrappier way of keeping their money, they actually do have plenty of it in all the different ways that someone who is suspicious of a banking system might have. Right?
Right.
We did learn that.
We do. Yeah. I mean, that is part of the book. But, that notwithstanding, the fact is that these kids, as far as they're living on a day-to-day basis, are really living in this interesting realm of absolutely mind-bogglingly high incomes and very little in the sense of like personal net worth, which is a very rare situation for an inherited wealth type person to be in.
Right. Unless the generation ahead of them was so sure that you would never be a spendthrift. You would never be someone who wasn't capable or interested in their money, that they let them have the money because of all the sort of laws of inheritance and of what I found was that multi-generational inheritance had different laws. If you were someone who had it many generations back, or you were someone who was a post-Holocaust Jewish generation, that the people who gave you this money would never have imagined that you would be so disengaged with it. I think the thing you're talking about, which you are correct, is rare because these kinds of people are rare. Jews are rare, right? Jews comprise a very tiny part of the population, but there are different ways to keep money, and people who have had it for many generations tend to lock in the idea inherent to their system that someone's going to accidentally screw it up. Whereas just like the tiger moms that you mentioned are shocked when their children want to, follow their truth and become surfers on the beach, if they're allowed to do that. This is a sort of new phenomenon for a post-Holocaust generation.
It's so interesting you say that. One of my favorite genres of literature is the riches to rags tale. And I really like nonfiction riches to rags tales. And the single greatest nonfiction riches to rags tale, although it's not entirely true, and he's very open about that, is Vladimir Nabokov's memoir, Speak Memory, which is just amazing. And he talks about that whole thing of, growing up rich and then losing it all. The other one that really springs to mind in this case, because it's very explicitly Jewish, is The Hare with Amber Eyes by Edmund de Waal, where, he tells the story of this family that was just mind-bogglingly wealthy in pre-war Vienna and then loses everything.
Because of pre-war Vienna, right?
Right. And one of the through lines that you see in these stories, whether it's, the Ephrussis or whether it's the Wittgensteins or whether it's the Nabokovs, is exactly what we were talking about earlier, which is this sense in which if you grow up in the bosom of wealth, you actually often just come out fine and you don't have these fears and there is something, terrible about losing it, but also fine.
That's what I was saying. You have some kind of mindset that just keeps you rich. Like right. Taffy was saying, having no money made you take risks. But what I've found is that having the security of being born with money and never really knowing what it's like to have to scrap for it makes you take risks because, and you see this in the research, like people who start businesses are more likely to come from wealth. There's less fear, I think.
And that's like the opposite of the veal calf syndrome that you talk about in the book, which is that the kids wind up growing up fat and barely able to walk unaided. Yeah, it's like it's two very different outcomes from the same beginning.
The entitlement. I remember because I went to state school undergraduate and then I went to Columbia for graduate school. And at Columbia, I met a lot more people that came from money. And, we would talk about like what jobs you're going to apply to, blah, blah, blah. And all like the fancy Ivy League college graduates at Columbia Graduate School were just like, well, you could just like make a lot of money and do consulting, or you could do this other thing that makes a lot of money. And like in my head, I was like, I could waitress. Like it just didn't, I didn't have that like sense of like, well, I'm going to go get like the high paying job, but all of them just really did. And that really like, I don't know, it just reset my expectations for class. And I think if you grow up in an upper class, you sort of have these higher expectations, less fear, and you can wind up being more successful that way.
But look at the timeline of what you're talking about. Like you get a waitressing job because you need money that week.
Right.
When you are going for those consulting jobs or whatever, those took months to get.
Right. Right.
And like just think of those small perspectives. Like if you had told me when I was in college that in 6 months I could have a high paying job, I couldn't have taken it because I couldn't have survived the 6 months. But also remember that this is a book that is told from the perspective of people who are watching. And remember the epigraph of the book, the quote in the beginning is the Don Henley Boys of Summer quote. Remember how you made me crazy. And this is a book about how money makes you crazy, how not having it makes you crazy, how having it makes you crazy, how watching people have it makes you crazy. And Felix brought up the narrator before. If the question is, which I know it wasn't, why did this book need a narrator? It's because I don't know how you would tell the story of wealth right now without it being told by someone watching the wealth who didn't have it. And the narrator brings to the book all of the ignorance and fantasy that someone who is not raised with money has. Say me.
This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
Hello, I'm Simon Jack.
And I'm Zing Sing.
And together we host Good Bad Billionaire, the podcast exploring the minds, the motives, and the money of some of the world's richest individuals.
Every episode, we pick a billionaire and we find out how they made their money.
And then we judge them. Are they good, bad, or just another billionaire?
Good Bad Billionaire from the BBC World Service.
Listen now wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Former President Donald Trump has rewritten the rules of how the American justice system treats our nation's most powerful people. But long before this year's historic Supreme Court term, or even his presidency, Trump developed an approach to the law that has shielded him from legal accountability on everything from taxes to fraud to discrimination. I'm Dahlia Lithwick. All through August, Amicus will dive deep into Trump's history of bending the law to his will in a series we're calling The Law According to Trump. Hosted by award-winning journalist Andrea Bernstein, the series will highlight the tactics that led to Trump's recurring legal battles and examine the legal blueprint he used to fight back, to better understand how he'll continue to capitalize on his victories and fight to overturn his defeats, whether he does it from inside or outside the White House. Listen to The Law According to Trump on Amicus from Slate.
I do need to ask, because there are very few, if any, sympathetic characters in this book. Is that something that I should be reading in some sense as the narrator is a little bit crazy and unreliable and I shouldn't be taking all of that at face value?
I think the narrator might be bitter, but I would not agree with your assessment. I would say these people are incredibly sympathetic. I feel like these people didn't stand a chance. And they, like everyone else, are doing the best that they can. There is the screenwriter son with a bright future behind him who spends most of his time in hotel rooms reenacting his father's kidnapping. There's the terrified land use lawyer who was given his job by his cousin and can't seem to get ahead. at all because he can't take any risks and he's terrified of his own shadow. And there's the daughter who is so allergic to the family ethos of trauma that she tries to run as far from it as possible, even becoming a union organizer, which she swears is not a rebellion against her factory owning family. And in doing so, nearly comes to define it. So that's who we're talking about.
Well, I mean, Taffy, halfway through the book, I was like, oh God, I hate these kids. I was just like, get off your ass, lady, and just go take a job. Like the youngest, the girl, Jenny, at some point I was like, I don't like any of these kids, but I think in the end they're redeemed and like you're given the opportunity to feel empathy for them. But I did have the feeling throughout, and I talked about it with Felix a little, of this, like the portrayal of these rich, I know we call them kids, but they're adults, but the portrayal of rich kids is sort of unlikable, like that Succession thing where some people couldn't watch it because they felt like the kids were unlikable.
I guess I also think, what is your tolerance for the reality of people? I think that it is totally defensible to want to only spend time with characters that are called likable, but I have never found that to be my personal reading. A lot of people didn't like Toby Fleishman or hated him, and I loved him. A lot of people loved Rachel Fleishman. A lot of people hated her. Like, I guess I just don't know if I go to literature to spend time with people I like. But I guess what I wanted was to tell the story of these people at this moment in their lives and this moment in society where our economy is totally screwed, plus the revelation that there's no way to be unscrewed by it, that it seems like the American dream might be up.
I think what you're saying is inequality hurts rich people too.
It's that you need the economy to be healthy on all ends. That what I was never taught was that it isn't just about working class people trying to transcend their class. The entire system needs to work and have limits on it in order for the people in the middle and the lower classes to even feel like trying is worth it.
I wanted to ask Taffy, would you ever write a book about poor people?
Sure. Sure. It's funny. I'm writing something right now that I was just complaining about to my husband, that I felt like because it wasn't fueled by class rage, that it seems a little bit flat. I would write anything about money. But on the other hand, it is hard to hook people in and convince them to keep reading a book. I wonder, if I were writing a book about money, would it be as effective to write about poor people? And also the thing that I sort of wanted to land on here, because I do have a lot of experience writing about money, the thing that I wonder is the stories that have ignited me in the past come to me the same way a magazine story does. And it is about seeing something that is so outside of my experience that it allows me to see my experience more clearly. However, that also has to do with the fact that when you're learning how to write novels, which is what I've been doing for the last few years, right? Like as I did not go to journalism school, I did not go to novel writing school. I have found comfort in a direct correlation to the things I was writing for magazines, because I felt that I had a handle on magazine writing. And I felt like the things I wrote about people who were struggling were not as successful in terms of anything from the way people talked about them to the amount of people who read them as the things that I wrote about people who were thriving, which is a bad metric for how to choose a magazine story and not one I use.
Yeah, but the jeweler's story was so good.
The jeweler story. And then, by the way, this recent story I did about the kidnapping of the man who inspired the kidnapping section of my book and also the trauma, I think probably did better than any story I've ever written in terms of people engaging me about it, the numbers on it, people talking about it. I have been exposed to several very good adaptations of Little Women in my life. But whenever I watch one, I think about what it was actually like to be the daughter, one of 4 girls with a mother struggling to make ends meet. And I think, wow, we never really put on shows. We always just sort of fought and were afraid. And I always thought, in terms of where I grew up and how I grew up in a part of Brooklyn that was fine for me, but in retrospect was not a great section of Brooklyn in terms of safety, in terms of like the economics of it. And I always thought I would like to write a version of Little Women that actually takes place there and that. So yes, I would. I guess the long answer is I would definitely do that. And maybe will next, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about it because when we were talking about likability, I mean, there's this whole thing with when you're consuming content about rich people, there's like envy and kind of like hate for the rich people. You want to see them get their comeuppance, and it's fine for them to be a little more unlikable, you know, but if you're reading about poor people, you wouldn't want to, I don't think, read about terrible poor people. Like people relish a terrible rich person in a way they wouldn't a terrible poor person. Like it's just easier to have empathy for someone who is struggling versus someone who's had it all handed to them. But the magic of your book is in the end, you do have empathy for all these people because they have experienced this big trauma. And like you kind of were saying, like they never really stood a chance. So by the end, you're with them. You understand that, I think, as a reader. But it's like a harder ask.
But I feel like by the equation you're giving me, then if they were unlikable or despicable or like undeserving of empathy, being poor would make that better. Like meaning you would have more tolerance for it if they were poor.
Maybe. I don't know. I had just read Demon Copperhead a few months ago.
I know.
And the lead
also.
Yeah. And the main character is very poor, like
right,
just on the complete bottom end of everything. And he makes a lot of questionable choices, but you have that empathy for him because you kind of see this structure that he's living within. And I guess in your book, it's the same thing. These characters are making poor choices, but that's part of the system they were born into in the structure. So that's what they're going to do. And you have to have that empathy for them.
Can I ask you guys a question? Why did we love Succession? Like, what did we love about Succession other than it was very much in your square?
I think one of the reasons I loved Succession is also one of the reasons why I love Long Island Compromise, which is that just both of them are very funny. Like, as long as you have jokes, you know, and it's well written, like that's all I need. Taffy Brodesser-Akner, you are obviously the best person in the world. Thank you so much for coming on Money Talks, and obviously you'll come back.
Obviously I will. I love you guys.
Love you, Taffy.
We love you too. We love all of you listeners out there who also love Taffy. We love Merritt Jacob and Jared Downing and the whole Slate crew. And we'll be back on Saturday with a regular Slate Money.